Hey, sister.
Hey, sister.
Join me, Courtney Lewis,
And me, Carly Ferguson.
in our conversational podcast about everyday situations.
You can count on us to tell it to you straight with our own sisterly spin.
Consider this a phone call with your own Southern sisters as we discuss with you personal accountability, healthy relationships, managing responsibilities, and contributing to society.
Each episode will consist of straight talk and a call to action.
Your sisters are calling.
Thanks for answering.
Welcome to Hey Sister. This is episode 3. It's not about you. All right, Carly, I've been reflecting on our childhood, especially now that I've got my own kids who like to sometimes flail and wail about situations. And I am remembering back to how our parents would react if we had our own pity party, whether literally or figuratively, if we were like actually hurt or just having a bad day at school. Before I share my thoughts on that, do you remember any pity parties and what the parental reaction was for you?
I feel like my tendency as a kid when I got hurt or something was to draw attention to the fact that I was hurt, maimed, and needed help. And mom and dad were really good about bringing me back to reality that it was, in fact, not so bad. And they'd say those typical phrases that were like, rub some dirt in it or put your big girl panties on, things like that.
That was my favorite.
Yeah. They just brought me back down to reality and realized that, hey, I am okay and let's move on. I think that's kind of in general how it was. And it was not just like physical things. It was like, oh, I feel like my feelings were hurt or something. And they would just be like, hey, what did you do in that situation? Or what was your involvement in that? And how could you have improved?
I agree with all of that. And I'm glad you included some of those quirky Southern adages that we've promised our sisters. But one of the things that I remember most is if I was having these pity parties or fits about not getting invited to a party, feeling left out, feeling upset that some of my friends maybe didn't wish me a happy birthday, or that I felt like a band director didn't give me first chair when I felt like I deserved it, or any manner of those things. If I was having a pity party, I remember a few times mom saying to me, it's not about you, especially if I didn't want to go to, for example, church youth night or something like that. I would get reminded it's not about you. And one of my favorite phrases, and I'm being sarcastic there, was don't be myopic, which I feel like that was a kind of an ironic phrase considering I'm extremely farsighted, so much so that I'm legally blind in one of my eyes. But myopia is nearsightedness. So I thought that was kind of funny that I would be reminded to not be myopic. But I wanted to talk about this phrase, this it's not about you phrase today, not in terms of parenting advice, because every child is different. Every situation is different. So that's not maybe the thing to say to every kid every time. But I want to apply this in our own personal lives because I think that all of us could use some reflection and a reminder that we need to look outside of ourselves to find happiness, especially in these times when it seems like we're having to work a little bit harder to find happiness. I have a personal story that I'm wanting to share today that has really shaped my life over the past 8 months. And I also have found some really awesome research that I'm excited to share. But before I dive into those things, I want to ask Carly to share with us a list of the top results for increasing happiness and reducing stress that she found in a recent Google search. So Carly, take it away.
I did an online search for how to deal with stress, and the first dozen results had nothing to do with how to help someone. So the first was exercise, deep breathing, meditation, relaxation to music, supplements, lighting candles, reducing caffeine, which doesn't look likely in the near future for myself, but that's on there. That's good to know. Writing out emotions, chewing gum, laughing, learning to say no, learn to avoid procrastination. So yeah, none of those included service. I mean, at the bottom of one of the search results pages, there was the idea to spend time with friends, which I guess could tie into service, but it's amazing that there's that lack of how to help someone.
That's really interesting. And I think those are all great things. As you're saying them, I'm thinking, I like all those things. I really do. I want to do all those things. And I mean, except for reducing caffeine, maybe I'm kind of with you there. But I think that all those things would be great and helpful. I feel like a lot of those things that you've just listed would actually fall under the category of self-care, which is extremely important. And as we know, that's been a huge buzzword during this whole pandemic. However, sometimes I think that we lean too far one way And in the process of self-care, we're forgetting to be a little bit more selfless. So I wanted to talk now about a situation that I had happen to me a few months back. It was something that's really shaped my life. And I'm going to get a little vulnerable here. That's a hard word to say. I'm going to get a little vulnerable here, but it's a valuable lesson to me, and maybe you'll find some value in it as well. About 8 months ago, I had, at the time, my oldest was 5 and I had 4, 5 and under. And my oldest was in kindergarten and we were doing hybrid school. So there was 3 days a week where I had all 4 of my kids home with me, and I was supposed to be doing remote learning with my oldest. And I had a breastfeeding baby, and it was just a hard time, if I'm being quite honest. There was this one particular Monday where it just been a really hard day. And we made the decision that we just need to get out of the house. So we made the decision we were going to go to this park. And I load the kids in the car. I've got my baby in the infant carrier, my toddler in her 5-point harness, my older kids in their booster seats. And I'm like, okay, we're all buckled in, let's go. But before I even pull the car out of the driveway, I send a pretty sharp-tongued text to my husband. And I shouldn't have done it, but this is the mood that I was in. And I said, we maybe shouldn't have had 4 kids so close together. I was really feeling low. Put the car in reverse, pull out of the driveway, and I start heading to the park. I was playing a movie in the back of the car for the kids, which tells you, really, were things that bad? I've got my kids watching a movie in my car, and we're going to the park, but it felt pretty rough. And so I'm in the front seat, and I just out loud say a prayer while my kids are watching their show. And I pray that I'll be able to find peace, because I was not feeling any peace. We get to the park, we offload, and I decide I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to be on my phone, because that's what I wanted to do. As I pull up my phone, I look down at my baby in his infant carrier, and I realize he wants to explore. This poor kid, he wants to get out and explore. He can't walk, and he can't really crawl here at this particular park because it's all gravel. We live in Arizona. There's no grass, and he's not big enough yet to go up the steps of this little play set. So I thought, okay, I'll try and be a quote unquote good mom and play with him for a few minutes. So I unbuckle him, and we walk up and down the little bridges and over the stairs. We slide down the slide. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I've just released some oxytocin and I feel great. Maybe this was how I was supposed to find peace today. And right as I'm thinking that, I see this mom with her kids unload from their car and they start walking up to the park. I'm thinking, okay, somebody else is coming. That's fine. But I'm looking at her and I'm going, wow, this girl looks like $1 million comfortable. She looked like a celebrity that would be in a paparazzi magazine or something. She had on her Victoria's Secret sweatpants and her big diva sunglasses, hair in a messy bun. She looked fantastic. She's like what I would want to look like if I was leaving the house. I see her walk up, and she literally unloads all of her stuff on the bench where my infant carrier, my purse, all of our blankets and water bottles are all strewn. There's 3 other benches. Why in the world is she choosing this bench? Doesn't she know this is a pandemic and we're supposed to be socially distancing? I see this and I'm just like, great. A person. I haven't talked to people in months, is what I felt like.
Adult.
I know, an adult.
Control.
So I finished sliding with my kid and I decided I'm going to be brave and go back over to my bench. As I walk up, she says to me, are these all your kids? You know how that phrase makes me feel. So I'm like, yeah, they are. Looks like you've got some sandwich pretty close together too. And as I'm saying that, she replies back to me, yeah. And I hear this crackle in her voice. And suddenly I realize she's not as put together as I thought she was. And she starts to say, I don't know how you're doing it. I'm really struggling. I remember as she said that, I just felt so drawn to her and so much love for her. So as I'm sitting on the bench and I'm holding my baby in my blanket and she's sitting there in tears, she starts telling me about all of her struggles. And as she's explaining her life and her kindergartner, who she's also trying to do remote learning with, and how he has learning disabilities and how she's trying to manage that, because when he does go to school, he's acting up and he's rowdy. And so they're threatening to kick him out of the school, and how another kid is being bullied and that she's not included in neighborhood play dates, and that she was on birth control and that her birth control was giving her horrible side effects, and that her husband was giving her a hard time because he felt like she was acting different than the woman that he married. So she's unloading all this information on me. And my normal instinct, as you well know, Carly, is to give advice. But I had no advice to give. I just listened. And all I did when she'd give me some space to reply was just give her the pep talk that she was doing amazing and that she was loved and that her kids loved her and they were so lucky to have her because she was doing her best. And I could tell that even as a complete stranger, I could tell that. I just remember trying to give the pep talk that I wish somebody would give me. So I talked to her for a little while. Eventually I had to leave, but I remember I told her, if you ever want to come back to this park, we'll be here at this time on Mondays. So we continued going back to the park for several Mondays after that to see if she came, and she didn't. But that particular day, I remember when I left that park, I felt a little bit lighter in some ways because I didn't have some of the same struggles she had, but heavier in other ways because I realized that there are people that have really hard problems and hard trials in their life. So as I drove away, I had the thought that I should do more service. And I had some specific people pop into my mind of how I could serve them because for the last several months, I'd been really myopic. I had been on this self-preservation mode of trying to power through homeschool and trying to take care of all of the laundry list of things that needed to be done at home. I really wasn't looking outside of myself very much. So when I had this one experience, it acted as a domino effect where I started having all these people pop into my head of how I could serve them and people I haven't talked to. And it was really nice to have these thoughts that I should serve them. And the reminder that it's not about you. I could just hear that in the back of my head. And as soon as I had that thought that I should do these acts of service, I had another little thought creep in, and it was, well, what about that spiel that the flight attendants give on planes? The mask analogy. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. In a situation where the plane is going down, you always put the mask over yourself first, and then you can help someone else. Is that where you're talking about that one?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I had that thought come to my head, right? Like, well, what about my mask? Because I can't help all these other people when I feel like I need oxygen. I had that thought, and it was amazing and almost indescribable how piercing this answer came to me, which was service is your mask. And it reminded me that I've got to do service because putting a mask on somebody else, while I may consider that service, no, service is my mask. If I want to survive, if I want to thrive in my life and feel happy, then I need to be serving other people. So I'm not saying that I'm some great example of service. However, that experience has shaped me into wanting to be a better servant in my own life. And at the time, I was so out of the practice of doing service and looking for needs of others that I literally had to start keeping a service journal where I would write down any promptings I had and then act on them and write those experiences down in the journal. And I would pick 3 people a week that I was intentionally trying to serve. That helped me for several weeks to do that. And then it became more organic and I didn't have to actually plan it out. But it was really nice to get back into the practice that way by keeping a service log. I felt like that was my it's not about you personal story. It was hard. It was a really hard answer to get that because who likes to get chastised? But that's what it felt like. I felt like I was getting this chastisement in a way, whether it's my own intuition or heavenly inspiration. I knew that I needed to be doing more and that it wasn't doing more for myself. It was doing more for others, which in turn would make me a happier person. And I feel so much happier today than I felt 8 months ago. And I know it's because of service. I know, Carly, you would never brag about this, but I actually consider you a huge example of being a servant. You and your husband both. Do you remember the time we were leaving the lake and we were driving back and we were in a car and our tire popped and blew and we didn't know why, but I was in a car with mom, dad, and also my husband. So Cam and dad changed our tire because we were all in one car together. And then we found out later that you guys were right behind us. And did your tire blow or your tire blew and somebody else's? And you and your husband with 3 kids in your car, at least 2 at the time, maybe 3, stopped and helped these people with their popped tire. And I was like, oh, that is so good of you when you're taking a multiple hour trip to stop and help somebody else with a flat tire when sun is setting and it's dark. Anyway, I feel like you guys have always been really good at service. So I respect that because I feel like a lot of times when I pass somebody who has a flat tire, I'm like, oh, it stinks for them.
And I think to that, if you have the tools with you, it leads a little bit more. If you have the stuff to fix a flat tire or to change out the tire, then you're willing to. I am not one of those tools. I don't know. I wouldn't do it alone. But yeah, my husband, he's more proficient. and those kinds of things. So it becomes, we can do that. Yeah, let's stop. It's going to be quicker for you than probably for these poor individuals who had this happen to them. Because if you've ever had that happen to you, you see somebody else in that situation, you're like, oh my gosh, what can I do?
Right. But it would have been easy for you to excuse that and say, we're not the people to help. We've got 2 crying babies in the back seat. I believe if I recall correctly, it was 2 women. It was a mother-daughter or something like that. I remember just thinking, man, that was really good of you guys. Cause I would have not had my husband stop. I would have been like, keep going. Like we got a ways to go. If I'm going to serve, I'm going to try and serve people I know. And you're really good about serving strangers. There's different ways you can serve, and you have to find a way that works for you. But it's important to realize this life, it's not about you.
Right.
And you will find a lot more happiness if it is not about you. But going back to those suggestions that you found on Google, one thing I've learned over the past year is you can find an expert to tell you anything you want to hear. That's why we have so many differing opinions in today's world, and everybody is claiming experts as their source for their opinion. Yes, you've got all these great pieces of advice for how to reduce stress, how to feel more happy, and all of them could come from some experts. But I've got an expert that I want to share that actually backs up the opinion that I have that we're sharing on this podcast today, which is that we can become happier by looking outside of ourselves and not focusing as much on self-care, but focusing more on being selfless and this idea that it's not about you. So there's an author. Her name is Sonja Lyubomirsky. She wrote a book called The How of Happiness, a scientific approach to getting the life you want. This author, she's a highly regarded research scientist, and she's a positive psychologist. And I have really enjoyed her work. It has been so fun to learn from her. She's got not only this book, but she also does a lot of conferences. So if you're somebody who likes to watch and listen, I highly recommend you type in her name. We'll include it in the show notes into YouTube, and you can watch some of the conferences that she's been a guest speaker at. But her whole approach to how to be happy revolves around the idea that happiness takes work. And I love that, because sometimes we just think happiness will come when we reach such and such destination, and that it'll be a byproduct of just living life, or that we should expect it. And I love the idea that happiness takes work. It's like anything else in life. It takes work to become happy. And she has a lot of strategies for how to become happy. 2 of them are expressing gratitude and appreciation, which is important. We'll probably have lots of podcast episodes about being more grateful. But her second takeaway is practicing acts of kindness. And I love that word too, practicing, because if we're practicing acts of kindness, that will help us to become perfect, right? Like practice makes perfect. So if we can practice acts of kindness in our daily life, it will help us to be happier people. And I did want to share, she has a ton of research. Everything she does is based on science and research. So I love it, because if you watch any of her YouTube appearances and different conferences, one of the things I learned from her recently was she talks about how everybody has varying levels of happiness. And she says, so what determines your happiness, and why are there such individual differences in happiness? I don't know if you know this, Carly, but about 50% of happiness is based on your genetics.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So there's 3 factors that can affect your happiness in life. And she gave some scientifically based stats on this concept. And she says that these numbers can vary person to person, but on the whole, about 50% of your happiness is based on genetics, and approximately 10% is based on your life circumstances, assuming like a normal, comfortable life. And then that leaves the other 40% to be left up to intentional activity. So that means that there is room for our happiness to improve.
When she classifies happiness, is she saying it's like levels of a certain hormone?
She's saying like optimism, pessimism. I don't want to speak for her research, because I don't ever want to be claiming that I'm speaking for her, because she's got a lot of information out there. But my takeaway was that it's almost the equivalent of varying levels of optimism and pessimism, or just like natural.
I have heard there's epigenetics, which is
right
with genetics, those tendencies you have, genetically speaking, just like you might have certain weaknesses because it's, been passed down. So there are those things. So I guess that makes sense that there would be on the other end positive things to kind of gain from predecessors.
And I think that's what's interesting. Like, to think about a certain level of your happiness probably will stay status quo, right? But there's 10%-ish that's based on your life circumstances, and 40% is up to you. So if you could fill that 40% with 100% effort, because remember, happiness takes work, you'll be a happy person.
I would say that it probably is because that 40% can really affect that 50%, because a lot of times with epigenetics, the circumstances you're in, what you do, it turns on these different genes actually within us, like how you are behaving or what you choose to do can help affect those genes to turn on and off certain ones. That's super vague, but we're not getting into nitty gritty science.
Read her book.
Go to her and learn about it.
She has so many cool stats. Speaking of what you're talking about there, does the 40% affect the 50%, your baseline level that would be genetic and passed down? Well, one thing she talks about is that happiness is causal. So she talks about how, for example, people who make more money are happier, but also people who are happier make more money. So those kind of things like chicken or the egg, but she says that they really are causal on both ends. One of my favorite things that she says that actually has to do with this idea of it's not about you is that happy people are more helpful and helpful people are more happy. That kind of goes back to it's not about you. That if you're helping people, if you're helping, you're happy. I feel like there's a song there somewhere. I love this idea that happiness takes work and we all want to be happy. And I do think what's interesting too, she's talked about how happiness is not a standard that everybody wants in every country. Her ancestry is in Russia. And so she talks about how the country that her family came from would not have prioritized happiness as a measure of success as much as, say, the United States, Australia. So I find that kind of interesting because happiness is a huge indicator for success here for us.
So true.
And it might not have been as important to her ancestors as it is to us. It is important to make sure, though, if we want happiness, are we on the right path for the pursuit of happiness? And the number one way is to recognize that it's not about you. And her work supports that. So we'll include that book and that link in our show notes. Carley, is there anything further that you want to say on this topic?
I love how you brought that connection to the mask, because during the pandemic, not from an airplane mask, but these masks that we've been wearing, I think the pandemic has caused us to look more inward or to ourselves because, like you said, with social distancing, this is my bench. Why are you coming to sit on this bench I obviously claimed? It's got my name on it. We just have this tendency to be like timid to getting outside of ourselves because for a while there, we didn't know where other people were at. And I think there was a time and a place for that. And now we're coming out of it. And it's important that we get back out there. We strive to see somebody else in their reality. And so it was really kind of this woman to share her reality with you. That was really good of her to share that because it brought you back down to reality and what you're grateful for. And yeah, we don't need to offer advice, but being a listening ear, being available for those kinds of things. And it's hard because you can't fix things for other people, but they need someone to be there during it. Being aware of where somebody else is at, I think is the most helpful for us because we're not really looking to be 100% happy 100% of the time. When we're upset, usually it's because we're mad that we're not happy. We're kind of dramatic. We're like, this is so hard though. When we see the blessings of our children, yes, they can also be little tyrants, but it's so wonderful to be able to be their mother, and everyone would say that and you'd say that again and again, but then we just find ourselves in these little doldrums that we're kind of just being dramatic and you just need to be snapped out of it and say, this is amazing. And it's hard to do that. It really is. And you know it for yourself, but the way you really get outside of that and really, like you said, save yourself first is by thinking and extending that hand to somebody else. It just draws you back to reality. It helps you remember those good things without really even having to focus too much on it because self-care is so important, but like a lot of a good thing isn't really going to fix a lot of things. And if there's nothing really to quote unquote fix in your life, because there are obviously times and places to really work on those things in your life first, but in the general day to day, I think it's important that we're just aware of someone else for a change, just to change it up, get outside that moment.
I don't want to get too confused here with the masks we wore. And then there's the masks that I'm talking about on the plane, but I think our masks, our face coverings that we were recommended and are still recommended to wear sometimes almost became a crutch or an actual mask that we were hiding behind because why would I serve somebody else? Because I don't know if they're comfortable with it. There's this level of they may not want me. And so I don't want to step outside my comfort zone and do this service. So it's hard. You have to find that balance. And sometimes though, it takes work. Service takes work. Sometimes it takes preparation on the front end of something. Like you guys are talking about having that kit in your car so that if somebody does have a flat tire, you're prepared to help. And it takes time to prepare.
And doing it once, even not very well, will help you for the next time you do it. And that goes back to our hit it episode,
Right?
Because it just goes back to this idea that if you try to help somebody and it may not go as swimmingly as you might have hoped, you don't know, you didn't see her again, but you tried, you went, and you were available in case there was that need again. And I think that's amazing. And even just going to the park probably helped you because you knew that you'd be available if she was needing your help.
It did help me to feel like I was where I was supposed to be and I could be doing something that I was maybe meant to do in that moment. I think in summary, as I think about this and the straight talking that we've done, and I want to sum it up with, is that sometimes we only give our attention to others when we feel that involvement with them will be enjoyable for us. Obviously, there's people that we want to hang out with more than others, or there's activities we want to do. But when we think like that, we need to remember it's not about you. And our call to action this week is to ponder and pray if you're a praying person, and pick one person to serve this week. And we're talking real service, like the step outside your comfort zone and serve, not just smile or send a text message. Do something that will be meaningful for somebody else, whether that means maybe watching somebody's kids or making a meal or just giving a phone call and listening to somebody. That will make a huge difference, maybe in their lives and definitely in yours. I'll wrap it up with this final thought. If I had just gone to the park that Monday and I'd gotten on my phone, I would have missed a huge, huge pitch over the plate that ended up being a home run in my life. Wow. I feel like I'm going through way too many analogies. There's like the plane analogy and now a home run, and I'm not a sports person. So I feel like I need to wrap this up here, but I know how important service is from my own personal experience and from the How of Happiness book by Sonja Lyubomirsky. So I will share that link in the show notes for this episode. Carly, do you want to tell our sisters what they have to look forward to next week?
Yeah, next week we're going to be talking with Lindy Laws Cristello, who is an expert in all things cool. She's just the cool expert. She is a life coach, a fitness guru. She is a massage therapist, holistic expert, and a friend of ours. And she is going to talk to us about how to quiet our mind. And that is very powerful for us. So we're really excited for you to hear those wonderful tips that she has to share. See you next week.
And I feel like that's kind of been a trigger word.
Buzzword.
Buzzword. Okay. Thank you. Trigger word is different than buzzword. Wait, where you say that. All right. I think we're going to call that a wrap.
See you next week. Bye. We can't say see you next week. We don't see anybody. What am I saying?
Be on the lookout this week for our roll call post on social media, where we'll be asking for your It's Not About You experiences and aha moments.